Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Traffer, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Morning, Ted. How are we?
Liam, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I am very good. Very good. I cannot complain. It's a Thursday, which is always nice.
Although you say it's a Thursday, but when people listen to this, it may not be a Thursday.
That's true.
It's a bit of a conundrum there.
Yeah. If I've confused you, I'm sorry.
And then people are checking their calendars like, wait a second, I lost a whole week.
Yeah, no, it's good. It was. I'm actually a little bit groggy today. I decided in my infinite wisdom to deep dive around some a patient funnel for a particular study and trying to get to the bottom of it. And I stupidly started at about 6 p.m. last night and didn't finish it until about after midnight, because I was just like, where the hell are all these patients like going to? So
that's the problem with a funnel. There is no bottom to it. So there's your problem in the first place. You're never going to get to the bottom.
Yeah. Get to the bottom of my soul. That was the only thing. It just sucked away. It's just so funny, isn't it? It's like they're so complicated because everyone like starts like looking at them and going, well, okay, patient is just flowing through and they expect that's what it is, but it's actually like that's not really managing the patient pipeline. It's like, where are the blocks, and then how do you unblock those blocks? So I found like something in the region of 20% of the patients that were already in the process were just like stuck. And it's like, well, okay, right. who's doing a thing with those people now? Because you've got enough in order to get to your targets actually quicker than planned. So let's focus there.
Yeah, and if your candidates are blocked, then eventually a hole may open up in your funnel and they disappear from the funnel entirely.
So yeah, absolutely. And it's just like it's simple things like it happened a couple of weeks ago, and part of the challenge was that just people had only been calling the individuals 9 till 5, and people had got jobs, right? And it's like, I'm not answering my phone. Right. And then all of a sudden, I think at the time there was only a small number of patients, say, like 20, 30 patients there. But as soon as it was like, right, okay, who's going on sort of night duty to ring some of these people? I think about 75% of them were then contactable after around 7 p.m. and then was booked in for a visit. And it's like, we got to work to the patient's requirements, where they are, and going to them rather than actually hoping that they're just going to answer their phone at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, right? There's another day for you.
Yeah. Last Tuesday,
next Tuesday.
Okay.
But it is because one of the things I've been thinking about as I've been sort of going through all this is like, what are like the motivational factors for patients about joining, right, trials? And I've sort of like, and I've been thinking about this for like a long time. And where it first came into play with me is just seeing patients' motivation and drive change. So, for instance, you've got like a low-level, like chronic condition that maybe waxes and wanes over time. And then what you find is that when the patient is in a higher level of perceived threat, by their condition, in the sense that it's not been controlled, is that there's a higher probability that they will then start to lean into clinical research rather than just the standard of care, right? So I came up with this idea, or two actually, that are sort of interlinked around this concept that motivation is not fixed and it has this amplitudes that varies. And with that, I sort of like designed this idea of this decision threshold matrix. in which you can think of it as like these 4 quadrants, and that you have along the y-axis like this like disease severity and the perceived threat of that particular condition, and on the x-axis you have like the standard of care, so effectively how well the individual perceives their treatment adequacy and the control of it. So in the bottom left quadrant, you have this very sort of like volatile, context dependent motivation. So you can have quite like, poor treatment adequacy or like standard of care. And often like the perceived threat is very low as well, right, in this quadrant. So motivation is quite unstable, and small changes in the disease sometimes can like make patients cross a threshold because their disease is not well being managed into like a higher level of perceived threat, which then sort of takes you up to that top left quadrant, which is around like there's a real threat driven, it's like maximum motivation, because ultimately the patient is seeing their disease as quite severe and feeling that way, but there's a low standard of care to them because they're just not being controlled right with their condition. And then when you move on to the right side, on the bottom is you've got low perceived threat of the disease with high standard of care management. So that individual their motivation doesn't have the same peaks and troughs because they are relatively stable in their condition with good overall management. And then you have the top right corner, which is around there's high treatment, but also high perceived threat or disease severity, which is that there's this like motivation, it has a higher amplitude because the disease is or the condition is a bigger factor of that. And what I found really interesting is like you can plot patients don't like exist in one quadrant, they exist wherever they are in their disease journey or their particular state. So for instance, you could have a person with, let's say for instance, with irritable bowel disease, and they could be high like disease severity and also low standard of care, so the top left hand quadrant, because they're hospitalized. But then when they're stabilized, they could go into the high treated or but low disease because it's subsided or it's like been managed down. So like patients like dot and dart around each of these quadrants. And what was really interesting to me is that and I don't know if I've mentioned this story before, is that I had an insomnia patient, and we were running an insomnia study, and it was really difficult to recruit because they were looking for a particular type of patient. And what we were finding a lot of the time was that patients were calling this particular gentleman. I like burst through the door, the phone's ringing like first thing in the morning. I get there to the office and open the office up at like 7:15 in the morning. The phone's ringing. I'm like, okay, this is pretty unusual. I wonder what's happening. Answer the phone, and it's a patient, and he just sounds absolutely so tired. And he says like, "Oh, I've heard your ad on the radio." I was like, right, okay, cool. He says, "I want in." I was like, okay, when do you want to come in? He's like, "Oh, I can come in first thing in the morning." I was like, perfect. We'll book you in for 8:00. Book him in. 8:00 comes, no show. 8:30, no show. So I give him a call. I'm like, dude, where are you? He's like, oh, I feel great. I've had a great night's sleep. And it's like, it's like such a bizarre thing that like there's this like flex of interest. And it what I realized in that moment was that there's like that motivation changes the dynamics, right? And his change is like not being able to sleep had crossed the threshold that he wanted to do something about it rather than just live with it. But when he was fine and he had a good night's sleep, he didn't care. It's just it's absolutely wild to me. So it's like I think people I don't think we necessarily think about these type of factors when we're trying to deliver trials, or at least looking at the protocol to say, okay, where are those patients likely to sit within these quadrants and this sort of matrix, to then understand, okay, what are the messages and what is the understanding of if a patient is going to be going in and out of these different quadrants, and therefore does that drive their motivation?
Yeah, I think so. Lots of things came to mind as you were talking there, and first of all, it's not just like whether the standard of care is working. A lot of people can't access the standard of care, and so that can be a challenge and push them into that quadrant as well. But I think that there's so many conditions that wax and wane over time as far as the severity goes, and that in and of itself has an incredible burden on individuals, and actually can be a source of frustration where they they want to participate in the study. They're really interested to participate in the study because they know how awful it is when their condition is excuse me, is more severe. But at the point of screening, it's just not severe enough to qualify, and so they get excluded from the trial, and that can be a very frustrating circumstance for them. So, yeah, I think understanding that these conditions change within the individual, and it can be for lots of different reasons, but being conscious of that. And yeah, it's one thing to say, oh, we have a list of 10 people in our database who are interested in this trial. Well, the reality is that unless you've seen them really recently, things may have changed in their life, and they may have a great deal of interest in being considered for the study and participating in the study, but there's lost so many factors that prevent them and get in the way of them participating, not just their condition severity or availability of treatment. I mean, these are two incredibly important factors, but then we have to dig into what does a study design look like, and did we create a study that actually lines up with their ability to participate, or did we build in too many endpoints and they're just not going to be able to participate in the study?
Yeah, no, I agree completely, because I think that there's like I think that like the Matrix, that I described rather than the movie, is like the higher end or the top level, because I think you're absolutely right, which is there's this like trial value equation that patients go through, right, when they're trying to make these decisions. And like I see it as like a calculation that is just automatically running in an individual's head. So I sort of like been thinking about this just to try and understand like the behavioral science aspect of it. Is that, so I call this like equation, this trial value equation, and it's basically it's a heuristic. It's a rule of thumb rather than scientific, but it is grounded in things like expectancy value theory and hyperbolic discounting and self-determination theory. And what's interesting is that like you have an equation, right, and you have the equals to participation value, and then the numerator, so the top above the line, is what they stand to gain and how likely they think it will work and how genuine that their own choice feels. So it's like perceived benefit times the belief it will work times the motivation quality. Essentially, are they do they feel in control of their own decision? And then I think that what happens is they then run this calculation against the denominator, which is very much to your points there, is like logistical and physical and psychological weight of participation. So what happens is that we typically like the denominator in trials, to your point around the study design and things, that typically always grows, right? Because it's like, well, what's the logistical, physical, psychological burden? We're asking more from patients to like come in, do more visits, and so on and so forth. So we start like ratcheting up that value, and therefore we don't necessarily think about the plus value at the top as a numerator to be able to say, like, how are we changing and helping patients it become not only like less from a logistics, because we can have things like, oh, right, taxi services and things like that, right? But we don't really think about like how are they calculating some of these things like perceived benefit? Like, what are the benefits? A good example of this was I did a study, God, this is years ago, and what was super interesting, it was a overactive bladder, and they came to us as a rescue site, and they hadn't delivered anywhere near the study hadn't delivered anywhere near the numbers that they had needed, or rescue site, should I say. And what was interesting is that it was looking at overactive bladder in a particular patient population. But when we started to understand the trial, so the design was looking at the overactive bladder, but it also had a number of memory assessments, because the concern was that this particular medication could also impact cognition and therefore memory. And what was interesting is that when you started to look at the patient profile of where they were searching, they were looking just primarily for overactive bladder. But when you start to like shift the focus in like a completely ethical way, it was just surfacing what already existed, by saying that actually, as part of this trial, you're also going to be getting your memory assessed. Now, overactive bladder is obviously mostly in the elderly people, in an older population, right? So it was a case of what we did is we started to surface the cognitive performance and screening and understanding. So you had people that were effectively like overactive bladder, but worried well about their memory. And that changed the whole reframe. So all of a sudden, just by surfacing what already existed and then starting to like, signal that in marketing efforts and things like that, the same protocol, no difference, but just a surfacing of information that was already there, and then talking to the right people, their whole value participation equation completely changed. And we ended up like within about 6 weeks of like going live, we completely like delivered everything that all the patients that they had needed. So I think it's really important that like it's about understanding what those patients are calculating and really surfacing what is important to them, not just what we think is important or what is important to us as researchers, right? So I think it's like how do you make that value of participation very legible in terms that like really matter to the person that we're asking to participate?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is we often think about solutions for groups without engaging them. Because if there had been engagement with the right patient groups early on in that study, they probably would have surfaced the fact that the memory part of the study was really important to the potential candidates for the study, and could have started off on a really good foot. So yeah, really interesting discussion, Liam.
Yeah, I think on that point is that I think it's also like I think sometimes we'll see some of these things as negatives, right? It's probably perceived as, oh, it's a negative because they have to do these cognitive assessments that are quite like long-winded. And the reality is that how do you turn that into a positive? It's going to be a positive for someone, and it's just finding the right people that is a positive too. Now, I think there's obviously you can only do the things that were in the confinements of the protocol, but there's always value in there for the right people, and it's about surfacing those things, I think. So yeah, it's the reframe.
That was a really interesting example. Yeah.
Reframe's really important. Cool.
Excellent.
Thank you, sir, for listening to me waffle for 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, that was very thought provoking. I took some notes. I had to draw out the matrix in order to actually.
Yeah, we might have to draw it out and
Understand.
stick it out with
Yeah.
just so people can see, and also the equation, because I think they are. It's quite hard, isn't it, to explain? Like, I mean, even that's relatively simple in the grand scheme of things, but it's like hard to explain a model through words alone. That's my takeaway.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thanks,
Cool.
Liam.
No worries. Thanks, Ted. Take care.
Liam gave us a lot to unpack today. If you have questions about the episode or would like to get more information about the Candidate Decision Threshold Matrix, contact us through our website at innovatingclinicaltrials.com. Follow Innovating Clinical Trials podcast on LinkedIn and on your favorite streaming service. While you're there, give us a like or rate the podcast. The Innovating Clinical Trials podcast is hosted by Liam Eaves and Ted Trafford and is produced by Tarini Chakurthi. Opinions expressed are those of the participants and not their respective employers.